Welcome everybody to the first Ask the Collective show. My name is Richard Baker. I'm the founder of Collective Responsibility, and it's really a pleasure to be here. We've been kind of playing with this idea for a while because while we put out a lot of content, we don't exactly engage with our audiences, engage with our stakeholders enough. So what we're hoping to do is use this platform to really connect to you, answer your questions, and help you, be it define sustainability for yourself or learn a few tips, tricks, insights that will help you to execute on your vision. All right, so really been overwhelmed by the number of questions we received. I think we received 25 or 30, and it gave us a great stock to start from. But for today, we're going to try and keep it 3 or 4. It's an experiment. Bear with us. And the first one is coming from Travis Opocensky, and he asks, what do you see as the most important next step in addressing the pattern of food waste in China? And is there a weakness in the chain? Does the whole thing need fortification? And then what can be done? Food waste is probably one of China's biggest problems when it comes to the food and ag sector. It's an efficiency issue for us. You look at the amount of water food and ag require just to be grown, and every time you waste a kilo of anything, you're wasting liters of water. So we really take this from a supply chain standpoint. Now, interesting enough, in China, the vast majority of waste is actually before it gets to the consumer. So it's on the farm, it's in distribution, it's in the sorting, it's in the grading, and then it's in the processing. So about 60% of the waste there. And then about 40% comes afterwards, so after you and I buy it. So for me, there's a few things that really need to happen here. And one is that through the industrialization of land, or at least the combining of land, or the better planning of crops, be it from where you plant it to how it's purchased. This is a really big way for China to save on food waste. The second one is cold chain. I mean, if you think about when you buy a bunch of bananas at the market here and anywhere in China, they go from green to brown in 3 to 5 days. In the States and Europe, you can get 7 to 10 days on them before they go brown. And the reason is because when the ripener is applied to the banana, it's ripening the entire time in transit. Where if it was to enter the cold chain, they could bring it down, slow the ripening process so that it actually ripens on your countertop, not rots on your countertop. So that for us is like the big challenge. Now, if we are a brand, this presents some challenges in terms of how do you work with this? Because there's a lot of food safety scandals. So you have to really, as a brand, think about what you're going to do when you're delivering food safely to the market. And there's a lot of risk in that because firms like Yum and McDonald's have had major disruptions here when they had a failure in their supply chain. Food safety, product relabeling, some kind of waste that re-entered the supply as a product that should be sold. So you really have to consider that because the systems here are vastly different. But I also think one of the biggest opportunities and most exciting opportunities in food in general is just the fact that people are now really concerned about food, and they're thinking about how much they order, what they're ordering, what it costs. And they're happy to spend a little bit more for the organics, for the farmer that they know. They want the story more and more. So for us, there's a lot of opportunity here as well as kind of the challenge. Our goal, really simply, we hope to kind of promote more people to solve the waste problem in the distribution supply chain. And that for us is where you can make the biggest gain. So Travis, thank you very much for your question. I hope I've answered it for you. So the next question is a tag team. Hunter's question was, what's the status of China's pledge to become an ecological civilization? And then John's kind of response to her, maybe a follow-up, was, is there actually an official ecological civilization definition? And is it something born or does it evolve over time? And to be honest, to be very short and frank about this, for us, the definition was really kind of put out there as part of one of China's 5-year plans. But on a daily basis, we're not hearing about this, at least not yet. And it's something that maybe is providing a framework or is inspiring or is a goalpost for where they want to lead going forward. But the reality is, it's going to have to evolve over time because as fast as China's moving, as scalable as its challenges are, and as kind of hodgepodge as some of the solutions may seem, you can't just use one framework or one definition to describe what's happening outside in these cities. China is not an ecological civilization. It's an urban environment, and it's going to have to react as such. Now, it can be inspired by nature. It can strive to bring more nature in. It will respond to its citizens and to its residents of cities and what they want as part of their urban environment. But at the end of the day, we're not just some island with a bunch of coconut trees. We are megacities of 35, 40, 50 million people going forward, and we're going to have to find a way to find ecological balance with civilization. Our next question comes from Ariel Muller. She has a very important question, which is, how much is China's leadership in sustainability, how much can be simplified to a yes or no? And what is kind of like, there's a lot of uncertainty around their commitment. And honestly, Ariel, this is a great question. It's something that I think gets clear over time. China's still developing, and it's reacting to multiple stimuluses in their systems. There's a clear shift in intent, which is to say, 15 years ago when I landed here, the intent was to drive GDP. And now there's a clear shift and a clear debate about how much they bring back that focus from a pure GDP, pure growth model into something that is more balanced. And part of that is becoming basically a discussion because they've amassed wealth, because the middle class is growing, and because as they grow, they start to expect more from an economy, more from cities, more from their lives. And that's a great thing, that's a great trend. We're definitely seeing that play out at the international level in terms of the climate agreements that they've been making, but also at the local level when they're putting in new laws and starting to enforce them. But commitment is certainly wavering. It's certainly a challenge, particularly in cities that haven't quite reached that status yet. You know, in Beijing and Shanghai, like Shanghai, we have discussions all the time about how to make the city more sustainable, about urban transport and mobility, about greening spaces. You know, you have those conversations because we have the luxury of the economy being what it is in Shanghai. Beijing, they obviously struggle with smog, and that's not all their fault. Part of it is, you know, at the city level and how their energy mix, their industrial mix, you know, the cars and that aspect. But they're also surrounded by coal country, by steel country, by dozens of cities that are building. And so they have to balance that as well. In some sense, when China says, we need the West to allow China to grow, Beijing is also being asked by the surrounding cities. And that's important. And that's where you see some of these conflicts. But at the end of the day, I think the intent is certainly changing to where there's far more consideration for the environment, for society, and for a balanced economy across this country. So, all right, our last question comes from Rob Watson, the father of LEAD. How do we define and accelerate the transition from an economic system where the disconnected consequences of a transaction from the transaction itself is hardwired? So basically, how do we bring responsibility and accountability together to solve the externality or to remove the negative externality? And this is a really big question, Rob. It's something that we talk about on a regular basis, and I think there's a few things that I think help this. The first thing is, when it comes to moving from where you're accepting the externality, you're accepting smog, you're accepting dirty water, to where you want to change, you need a catalyst for change. And often in the country, like what I've seen in Shanghai and what I believe we'll see in others going forward, is that the externality becomes personal. It becomes something that affects the individual at the personal level. That could be the cost of education. It could be having a child with asthma attacks. It could be whatever. It just has to be personal. And that personal catalyst has to be so strong that it catalyzes action. And it has to be action that is not just easily isolatable or will eventually peter out because it just kind of goes away. It moves off the news cycle. It has to be something that people want to fight for. And then that provides one kind of movement in the right direction on the overall equation of valuing the externality from the viewpoint of government and business. Another one that I've really seen in China in particular, particularly over the last 15, 20 years of my time in this region, is that as you go from manufacturing for export from Asia to the United States, to manufacture and consumption in the same market, it's very difficult for manufacturers, or anyone of that matter, to hide the externalities of their supply chain and at the same time profit on one end and extract on the other. It's getting more and more challenging. I think you've seen this in California when it comes to water, and say maybe some of the pushback that Nestle got or the almond industry got. We certainly saw this with Nike in 1997. It required American students. But now, what you saw with Apple is that it was a local pushback that forced them to really take a proactive step forward in addressing environmental and social issues that they faced. So the closer the population of impact is to the actual source of the challenge, the easier it is for us to move from a point where we can't value the externality to where we can, and then the action follows from there through a tax, through a law, through a fine, through a boycott, whatever it may be. At some point, once you get to that point, once you get to that position where the externality is known, the downside of that externality is understood, then the price is much clearer and action can take place. That's the big broad picture, but if you have a specific question about a specific challenge, be it carbon, water, food, whatever it may be, please follow up with that question. I'll be happy to kind of focus it on that specific product or industry. So with that, we're going to wrap up the first Ask the Collective. Again, I would like to thank all of you for your questions. We have a bank that's going to come out for the next month, and for some of you, we'll start to kind of go back and forth over personal videos or personal answers. We hope that you have a great week. We hope that your 2007 will start off in a fantastic way. And for those of you that are about to celebrate the Chinese New Year, 恭喜发财.